I lost the love of my life nearly 40 years ago. Tonight, I finally said goodbye. I remember the precise moment my soulmate died. July 8, 1982. It was a sunny afternoon, the warmest in years, and I'd been hiking along the coast when I spotted an elderly figure lying next to the road. A portion of the stranger's skull had shattered, exposing a deep recess of glistening brain matter I couldn't bring myself to look into. Blood seeped from the wound and ran along the crevices of her wrinkled face like rainwater through a gutter. As I kneeled beside the future love of my life, her vacant eyes found mine, then she smiled. Her mouth was crammed with brown and yellow teeth. With arthritic claws she tugged my sleeve, slowly reeling me toward her. At first, I thought she wanted to share a great secret, but instead, she craned her neck forward to kiss me. The taste of blended fish guts drilled down to the pit of my stomach, and when I pulled away, a trail of cloudy phlegm linked our lips together. Quite a memorable first kiss, if you ask me. The lady went into furious convulsions before dying with a liquid rasp. 20 minutes later, 2 paramedics loaded her corpse into a body bag. Since the poor woman died in tattered rags with no identification, the council gave her a pauper's funeral which, out of an odd sense of guilt, I attended. And to this day, that stretch of road remains haunted by the entity known as Shrieking Susan. Susan's your typical urban legend, a withered spirit, one draped in a rotted cloth, who wanders aimlessly up and down the coast. According to the tales, she vanishes and reappears like a rabbit from a hat. One man even claimed he hit her with his truck, although no body was recovered. Back then, I never would have guessed the silly stories were more than superstition. In September 1985, a striking older lady wandered into the pub I just started working at. She was in her 60s with long gray hair and powerful green eyes. She had this ageless grace, the kind where you could tell she'd been a true beauty back in her day. She threw me a warm smile, one that seemed oddly familiar. "It's good to see you again." Good to see you too," I replied, after a pause. She looked offended. "You don't remember me?" I gave a noncommittal shrug, afraid I'd already cost myself a tip. This must be the first time we meet." She offered me her hand across the oak counter. "I'm Sierra, Patrick." For the next 3 hours, Sierra asked endless questions about my life, completely fascinated by each answer, no matter how mundane. "Have you got a special lady?" she asked. "Yeah, Abby." I showed her a photo from my wallet. "You never told me about Abby," my sole customer said with a smirk. "Is it serious?" "I'd say so. I think I need another brandy." Staring at the mature lady in the back bar mirror, I said, "How about you? Got a special someone?" "I do. And does this lucky fella have a..." In all the time it took me to turn around, she vanished. Name. Over the next few months, Sierra dropped by for an occasional chat, always by herself, forever asking about my life. At times her wrinkles seemed less pronounced, the texture of her skin smoother. Shortly after my 21st birthday, she strolled in wearing a gray sweater that did wonders for her figure, along with a long, floral skirt. Sultry was the word that sprung to mind. "Good evening, Patrick." She smiled. She was wearing bright, red lipstick. "Sierra," I nodded, already pouring a brandy. "How's things with Abby?" "We broke up," I replied, glumly. As I handed over the glass, Sierra's hand closed around mine and she bit her bottom lip. "That's too bad. Maybe I can help, cheer you up?" Her velvet voice made my forearm hairs stand to attention, amongst other things. Somehow she seemed both younger and older than me. In retrospect, it's strange to think that simple gesture was one of the most sensual moments of my entire life. We slept together that night, in my cramped apartment above the pub. Sierra seemed to know her way around. Afterward, as we lay next to each other breathing heavy, I realized I was hers. Hopelessly, endlessly. Despite our age gap, she had this intense energy, this powerful allure no other woman could ever hope to match. So imagine my reaction when I woke up and discovered she'd already left. I figured our night of passion hadn't been quite as invigorating for her as it was for me. 2 years passed. By that point, I'd become manager of the bar in everything besides title and had, almost, resigned to marry a nice girl from the village, one closer in age to myself. But then, before I could close up one stormy night, there was a loud bang against the door. "Sorry, we're closed," I said. Another. "I said we're closed." And a third. "Listen," I shouted, furiously undoing the latch. "I told you." At the sight of the familiar figure out there in the heavy rain, my voice trailed off. "Sierra." She threw me that signature smile. "Are you gonna make a lady stand out in the cold all night?" I quickly ushered her inside. "What's going on? I haven't seen you in forever." She wore denim shorts that exposed her fantastic thighs and looked much younger than before, mid-40s at most. Her drenched shirt clung to her torso. "Tell me, what age are you now, Patrick?" "24? And have we ever," as she leaned forward, green eyes locked on mine. I watched the muscles in her neck rise and fall. Silver streaks were threaded throughout her chestnut hair. We have, I replied, slightly confused. I suppose now's about the time I meant to tell you. She took a deep breath. I'd like a drink. Whiskey, if you'd be so kind. And get one for yourself. You're gonna need it? After she stripped off her saturated clothes, I handed her a blanket, then we sat alongside the roaring fireplace in two leather, button chairs. Tell me what you know about time travel, she said. I shrugged. Makes for good sci-fi movies. What would you say if I told you I was a time traveler? That caught me off guard. Like in the movie with the DeLorean? Not quite. More like I've come unglued. I sort of skip all over. You've lost me, I said, already getting a headache. She smirked. Well, it's just I can't go very long without falling. I'm here with you now, but at some point I'll skip forward or backward. There's no telling where I'll wind up. Things get a little messy. I've even bumped into myself before. What's today's date? June 3rd, 1987? She nodded. What happens next is I'll hang about, likely for a day or two, but possibly longer, and then skip into either the past or future. 1 minute I'll be here, the next, pop. I could be in the 60s. So you skip through time every few days? Yep. When I was younger there was much longer between skips. Years, in fact. But the older I get, the more frequently they happen. The amount of time I stay put gradually shrunk into months, then weeks. Now I'm lucky to get more than 3 days strung together. How far do you, I fumbled for the right word, bounce? It varies. I've gone as far back as the 30s and the latest year was 2042, although I'm mostly concentrated around the same few decades. I guess I'm drawn to certain. She quickly reached forward and squeezed my lap, compelling individuals. Did I believe Sierra's story? No, not at all. We did, however, make love again. This time on the ticklish woolen rug beneath the chairs. For the next 2 days, we rarely left the bedroom. Then one morning, as she wandered across the kitchen wearing nothing but my checkered shirt, coffee cup in hand, she vanished mid-conversation. Mid-word, even. The cup dropped onto the floor where it broke apart and distributed the contents while I sat there, open-jawed. Sierra's story was true. Over the next few months, she became a regular guest at my apartment, never staying put for more than 2 days at a time. Meanwhile, the pub owner passed away and, since he had no children or spouse, left the establishment to me. One busy St. Patrick's Day, Sierra strolled in and found a seat behind a row of taps, pinched between other patrons. By that point, I was in my mid-20s whereas she had the appearance of a lady close to 40. In the few seconds I could spare between pulling pints and collecting glasses, we conversed. What stage are you at? I asked, simultaneously taking an order from a couple who'd just walked in. Sierra and I had developed a shorthand to give me a feel for which point she was at in life. I'll jump again in 6 months, she answered, eyeballing the angry old man who slammed the counter hard enough to make several coasters jump up. Hello? Some service please? 6 months. By far the longest she'd ever stuck around. The prospect excited me. I grabbed an apron and tossed it her way, then set a tray of drinks on the counter. In that case, make yourself useful, I said, smiling. Carry this over to table 5. And so began our official relationship. We went dancing, took late-night strolls along the beach, and watched cheesy rom-coms, even though Sierra had already seen them all. She never talked about the future, having been warned against doing so by an older version of herself, and she made me promise never to mention our previous encounters. No spoilers, she'd say. And while I fell deeply in love with her, there were sporadic sightings of Shrieking Susan. By now I'd put the pieces together and understood why I recognized Sierra's smile that first time she entered the bar. However, I was torn on what to do, since she remained adamant on not knowing anything about her own future, otherwise known as my past. But I figured, she's a time traveler. I had all the time in the world to make that decision. Right? As I approached my 30s, so too did she. The amount of time we spent in each other's company became longer. Without her, I felt as alone as it's possible to be, an only child, both parents dead, no close friends. Things weren't always smooth sailing. Once, while Sierra and I weren't speaking, an older version of her popped by to seduce me. Having the younger incarnation walk in on us mid-act was painfully awkward, to say the least. There was lots of shouting. What happens now? I asked older Sierra, my head buried in my hands. Buy her some tulips and plead forgiveness. But outside those hiccups, which every couple inevitably experiences, the two of us shared an idyllic life. As the years carried on, my hairline receded, my belly expanded, and I found myself staring down the wrong side of 40. Sierra, on the other hand, almost aged in reverse. I mostly spent time with a version of her that couldn't have been more than 30. To the pub regulars and part-time staff who noticed her uncanny resemblance to that other waitress, we said Sierra went to live abroad, and that her younger sister had filled the vacant position. Although Sierra wasn't yet the mature woman I'd fallen in love with, those younger incarnations had the beginnings of her, which was enough. At one point she vanished for 2 years, with only occasional drop-ins by her older counterparts to plug the gap. Without her, my life felt bereft of passion. Of joy. You miss the strangest things when you're without your soulmate. Smiles. Welcome home kisses. Even the way their cold toes stab your ankles when they roll over in bed. When Sierra finally re-emerged, this time in her 20s, she was fresh from our first encounter from her perspective. In her youth, she frequently let things slip about the future, a quality I chalked up to her naivety. She told me she'd lived a normal life until February 2022, when there'd been a sudden flash of white light, then she found herself trapped in the 70s, decades before the birth of her parents. After ping-ponging around time throughout her teens, she spent 3 years stuck in 1927 at one point. She woke up in an unfamiliar bar at the turn of the millennium, an older gentleman sitting nearby. She'd never met him but felt an immediate connection. Even though she didn't know the year, a part of her intuitively understood she'd landed in the right place, that things would work out okay. The man said he had a bowl of beef stew ready. After eating, the stranger offered her a job and a place to sleep in a small apartment above the bar. She couldn't understand the reason for his generosity but, being trapped in the past, saw no choice other than to trust him. Despite their age gap, she soon developed feelings for this guy, resulting in an intense night of passion. And the next morning, after she finally worked up the nerve to tell him about her time traveling, he simply said, "I know." That's when she understood they had a destiny together. Listening to her story, I sorely wanted to end these leaps. We'd almost reached a point where Sierra wouldn't recognize me, and I needed her like I needed oxygen. If I could just pin her down, we'd grow old together the natural way, then she'd never become Shrieking Susan. So I hit the books. The kind of books you wouldn't let a priest catch you with. The spells and incantations were spread across 5 languages. Fortunately, by now we'd entered the digital information age. Google Translate was a gift from above. Any night without Sierra was solely focused on my studies. Thanks to my knowledge of the dark arts, the bar became a huge success, and I quickly found myself running several side businesses, 2 restaurants and a coffee shop, while living in a 4-story mansion. Since I'd have 20 years on Sierra at our first encounter, I exercised vigorously until the stomach rolls disappeared. My wardrobe got an upgrade too. It was all about that critical first impression. In 2009, a sleeping Sierra manifested on the floor of the bar, curled up next to the fireplace. She was wrapped in linen rags, her long, brown hair knotted with twigs and dirt. I prepared a beef stew, then quietly waited for her to wake up. It took 16 months to make her fall in love with me. Although inexperienced, little by little her shy smile became a warm, inviting one, and she worked up the confidence to snap back at pervy drunks with wandering hands. In time, Sierra morphed into a lady who would one day capture my heart. On New Year's Eve 2013, as we watched fireworks from the beach, a heavy blanket pulled around our shoulders to guard against the chill, I felt her body dematerialize. It seemed cruel how she disappeared as soon as she began the process of becoming the woman of my dreams. From that moment on, her visits were limited to 2 or 3 times a year, from a much older Sierra with declining mental facilities. She was slipping away. Slowly becoming Susan. My fascination with the books became an obsession as I searched for ways to break the curse. Those endless studies taught me how negative magical energy floats around if unchecked, which meant Sierra's condition may simply have been a case of wrong place, wrong time. My knowledge expanded to the point of understanding a spell that would knock somebody out of time. Several experiments with field mice and house cats confirmed this theory. Sierra's curse could undoubtedly be broken. But first, my love needed to re-emerge. So I waited. And I waited. And I waited some more. There were no further visits from Sierra, and try as I might, predicting the next appearance of Shrieking Susan was impossible. Realizing the two of us wouldn't grow old together threw me into a deep depression. The only course of action available to me now was breaking the curse at the moment of its inception. Negating the spell meant we'd never fall in love, but she'd also never become an old ghoul who terrified villagers while zipping around time, before finally getting hit by a truck then leaping into 1982 to die in my arms. I kept tabs on Sierra's parents. At one point, 2 decades earlier, she'd taken me to watch them from a distance when they were still children. The 2 of them grew up, got married, moved in together, and had a baby girl named Sierra. Her initial leap occurred on the 2nd of March, 2022, along that same coastal path where she died nearly 4 decades ago. Hidden behind a row of dark hedges, I waited. The instant she appeared, a dagger twisted into my heart. Even though she was far from the woman I adored, the pain of seeing her again was too much to bear. Memories of Sierra were all I had, the only light in an otherwise bleak and miserable existence. My life was completely empty, granted. But if she never time traveled, it would always be empty, without even faded memories of lost love. At that moment, I knew what I had to do. As I began the spell, blue sparks danced above my fingertips. A powerful wind summoned, seemingly out of nowhere. Sierra stopped and whipped her head around, terrified. Then, at the clap of my hands, she vanished into a terrible, white light. I'd set her off on a journey across time, placed a curse on her which was doomed to spiral out of control until she became withered and senile, incapable of staying in one year for more than 10 seconds at a time. But before reaching that point, she'd meet me along the way. And the two of us would reward each other with a lifetime of happiness.